It's only just beginning.
So the beautiful irony that after winning the Brexit vote, that was Great Britain's vote to leave the European Union. Many because they thought it was undemocratic. Well, guess what? It's the EU president who is actually demanding that democracy be respected in the United Kingdom.
We now expect the United Kingdom government to give effect to this decision of the British people as soon as possible.
While it's the UK government that seems to be displaying a masterly reluctance to invoke Article 50.
A negotiation with the European Union will need to begin under a new Prime Minister. And I think it's right that this new Prime Minister takes the decision about when to trigger Article 50 and start the formal and legal process of leaving the EU.
That's the big red button that states that the UK wants to leave the EU. For good, for keeps. That is, if it wants back in after this, it has to apply like anyone else and get 100% approval from all of the nations of the EU. That is, after it's invoked, one vote from, say, Lithuania or something means that the UK has to sleep in the bed that it's made. And bear in mind that the first time the UK joined this club, it was vetoed twice by France. Okay, but maybe it's just because the Prime Minister was for remaining. But surely the head of the Leave campaign is clear that the people have spoken and that their wishes should be immediately respected by invoking Article 50. Not quite.
In voting to leave the EU, it is vital to stress that there is now no need for haste, and indeed, as the Prime Minister has just said, nothing will change over the short term, except that work will have to begin on how to give effect to the will of the people.
And the thing that's maybe remarkable about this footage is this is one of the lead Brexiters in his moment of triumph, his great moment of victory. And yet he has the demeanour of a broken man who has just lost the biggest battle of his life. Me, I'm all with the EU president, that the people of Great Britain have spoken, and now they have to deal with the consequences of that decision. Time for you feelies over realies people to get a taste of what you actually voted for. First of all, let's acknowledge that the Leave campaign, the Brexiters won the June referendum. Good for them. This will probably single-handedly redefine the words Pyrrhic victory. Best summed up along the lines of one more victory like that and we will be utterly ruined. Now, sure, the poll was a pretty close run thing with 16 million one way and 17 the other. That's to the point where if you were to get a room of, say, 33 people, you really couldn't tell by a show of hands which one was winning. The pound fell about 10% on getting the Brexit news. And just to put that in perspective, if you were to say buy TVs from America or something, that basically means that the day before the referendum you could buy, I don't know, say 10 TVs or something, and the day after you would only be able to buy 9. Or let's look at it in terms of a British salary, say £30,000, which would now, one day later, only be worth something like £27,000 of what it was worth yesterday. A loss of about £3,000 on your average salary. Now, seeing as the annual contribution of a typical person to the EU in Britain is only about £100 per year, that means that drop in one day, assuming it lasts for only a year, cost Britain about as much as its contributions to the EU for 30 years. Now, sure, markets can be fickle things and they can bounce up and down a bit, but this was directly due to the Brexit vote, and it's most likely that this is only the tip of the iceberg. After all, let's look at this objectively. If you wanted to invest in Europe, it no longer makes sense to do it in England at the moment because you don't know what's going to happen over the next 2 years. It's likely that there will be a long-term atrophy of the investments into the United Kingdom because of this. Not that it's particularly likely to be the United Kingdom for much longer, because Scotland has already set in motion the paperwork for another referendum to leave the United Kingdom and join the European Union.
Scotland faces the prospect of being taken out of the EU against our will. A second Scottish independence referendum is already on the cards.
And given how the voting went, with not one single district in Scotland voting to leave the EU, I figure the United Kingdom will cease to be pretty quickly. Looks like you're going to need another flag to wave next time, guys. And Sinn Féin is doing a similar thing in Ireland, with the talks of a united Ireland, and even London, which you could argue is fairly sensible. After all, London has a larger population than Scotland or Ireland. It has its own democratically elected mayor. Why should they support with their own money the poor areas of England with all of its wealth? That would be like suggesting the richer areas of Europe should support, in part, some of the poorer areas of Europe. And really, now, after the Brexit referendum, what possible grounds can you have for complaint? The whole Brexit referendum was about smaller groups of people's rights to govern themselves free of larger bodies. Oh, sweet juicy karma. The United Kingdom Independence Party, which was so worried about the United Kingdom being destroyed by Europe, has done that far, far more effectively and quickly than Europe ever could have. And honestly, the whole referendum thing was bloody stupid anyway.
What else has Cornwall been in the news for lately?
It's gone independent.
Yes, a spokesman for the Cornish National Liberation Army said...
I mean, let me just explain something about British democracy. You elect members of Parliament. Their job is not to do what the majority want, but to do what they think is in the best interests of their constituents, which is a subtle but very important distinction. This is because they frequently have to make these decisions on complicated legal matters and the such like, of which very few people actually have a detailed understanding. So putting these things to a popular vote is just kind of pointless. And this is one of the reasons why this referendum was dumb. You see, it's a complicated issue which is susceptible to things like patriotic chest beaters with catchy slogans. Are they the best arguments? No, of course not. They take time, reading, and understanding these complex issues surrounding the decision. You want to win the popular vote, you have to be able to sum it up in something like 4 words, like make Britain great again, or I believe in Britain, or hope, or change, or they are Project Fear.
Those on their side who speak of nothing but fear, we on our side who offer hope, who believe in Britain. If we vote leave and take back control, I believe that this Thursday can be our country's Independence Day.
That sort of thing. These problems are not new. They are intrinsic flaws with democracy, which is why Churchill called democracy the worst form of government. It's just better than anything else that's been tried. Indeed, none of us live in a real democracy. Even the founding fathers of the United States were fairly disdainful of pure democracy, this sort of 2 wolves and 1 sheep voting over who to eat for lunch type democracy. Or what Thomas Jefferson had to say on the subject, that democracy is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people take away the rights from the other 49%. Is it just me, or do those numbers look remarkably similar to the Brexit vote numbers? I mean, let's just take this slogan here. We send the EU £350 million a week. Let's fund our NHS instead. Vote leave. Let's take back control. Oh, well done, 4 words. Now, I could, and did say several times, that this claim was bullshit. Most of that money comes straight back to the United Kingdom in terms of subsidies for the farmers, investment in the infrastructure, and science and the such like. You don't just send this money to pay bureaucrats in Europe. Virtually all of it is spent back in your own country. That is, if you don't send this money to Europe, you don't really save anything. Except, of course, you're out of the EU. You're out of the common market. Yet for thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even millions, this was a tipping factor in them voting.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
Hang on a moment, that was one of your adverts.
Well, it wasn't one of my adverts, I can assure you.
Maybe the easiest thing for us to do on the Brexit camp is just to talk about the net figure. And the net figure is £34 million every single day, £10 billion a year, and I say that is too much, and we should spend that money here in our own country on our own people.
My adverts, I can assure
Well,
you.
that was one of the Leave campaign's
adverts,
that money was going to go to the NHS.
And I think they made a mistake.
I would like that 10 billion to be spent helping the communities in Britain that your government damaged so badly by opening up the door to communist countries. And what people need here are schools, hospitals, GPs.
That's why many people have voted.
They made a mistake in doing that. But what I can tell you is we have a nice
You're saying
featherbed.
after 17 million people have voted for Leave,
Yep.
based, I don't know how many people voted on the basis of that advert, but that was a huge part of the propaganda. You're now saying that's a mistake.
And I mean, damn, this was the very spear tip of their campaign, and it's just one example. And this is maybe one of the reasons that the day after the referendum, once the results were announced, that's when the Brits were frantically searching on Google for what is the EU, the day after they had voted to leave it. And that means I'm with the EU president here. The British people have democratically spoken. And even though it's not binding, the people of Britain should now live with the consequences of their decision. But honestly, if I were a gambling man, I would still guess that it's not going to happen. The most obvious reason is why hasn't Article 50 been invoked yet? Kind of odd, don't you think? I mean, here's Cameron all, yeah, let's not do anything hasty. And here's one of the most prominent people from the Brexiters, and he's all, yeah, let's not do anything hasty.
In voting to leave the EU, it is vital to stress that there is now no need for haste.
I mean, damn, this is making the United Kingdom look like the nasty girlfriend, always threatening to leave until someone calls her bluff, and then looking for reasons not to actually leave.
Yo, where's Bender? I miss Bender.
We won't know that until you leave.
Oh, I'm leaving.
There's the door.
I'll be good.
Meanwhile, Europe is, screw your let's not do anything hasty. All the uncertainty is going to screw over Europe all the time that you're still in it. You had your vote. You decided to leave the EU. Now invoke Article 50 so we can proceed over the next 2 years with a Brexit. Let's get this over and done as quickly as possible. I mean, that's just a beautiful irony for those who were worried about the democratic deficit in the EU. All the Project Fear about the EU superstate. That's your own Prime Minister there, ignoring the will of the people. That's one of the most prominent people in the Brexit camp, and he's ignoring the will of the people, while the EU president is respecting it. The way I read this is that no one in the United Kingdom actually wants to push that big red Article 50 button.
Execute Order 66.
Because that's a point of no return. Their place in history is guaranteed after that. And deep down, sure, Europe has its problems, but this is not the best way to deal with them. It's rage quitting Europe simply because you don't like some aspects of it. It's like cutting off your hand because you've got a hangnail. Now, technically, the British government don't have to do any of this anyway. The referendum was only advisory and pretty close. And the truth be known, many are now experiencing what you would call buyer's remorse.
But for some, the cold light of day brought disillusionment.
I would go back to the polling station and vote to stay, simply because this morning the reality is actually hitting in.
And probably most notably the ones who were frantically Googling to find out what it was that they'd actually voted to leave. And if the referendum was held again today, it's likely that the outcome would be reversed. Hardly a sort of ringing success for democracy. Indeed, even before the referendum, when it looked like the Remain was going to narrowly win, ironically, by the exact margin they lost by, one of the key Brexiters said that if it was close, he would want another referendum. Otherwise, it would leave unfinished business, which is actually about right. And then there's a petition which has already garnered over 3 million signatures, for another referendum which is only binding if there is a clear majority. I don't know, something like 60%, which is again probably how it should have been done in the first place. And the government would have been committed to actually putting this up for parliamentary debate if it had only gotten 100,000 signatures, and it's already gotten over 3 million. Further, one of the three parties in the UK has already said that it will oppose a Brexit in Parliament, and that's assuming that Scotland actually stays in the United Kingdom at all, and that's even if it doesn't have the ability to veto the Brexit.
In the interest
but can you imagine the
Scotland.
fury of the British people if you stopped them leaving
I
Europe?
can, but you know, it's perhaps similar to the fury of many people in Scotland right now as we face the prospect of being taken out of the European Union against our will. I didn't create these situations.
Further, it turns out that the House of Commons is about 2/3 in favour of staying in Europe. And remember, this is not mob rule. Their job is not to simply do what the majority want. It's to do what they think is in the best interests of their constituents. And bear in mind that nothing has actually happened yet, and this was the effect. The mother of all shit shows is about to begin, and even in the best case scenario, where it's cancelled for some bogus reason or another, what message has this sent to the rest of the world about the British people? Indeed, it's maybe one of the olive branches that you'll see in the future is the UK and the EU will have their renegotiation. I don't know, some token bullshit, and they'll call it a new deal of some sort. Well, now the circumstances are different from what they were before, and you will need another referendum to see what the people think of the new deal. After all, surely 2 referendums is more democratic than just one. I mean, surely you're not one of those anti-democratic people who thinks that the way a referendum works is once you get the result you want, that the people cannot change their mind afterwards. Better hurry though, because the reality is, if you don't get your ass in gear, there may not even be a United Kingdom left to hold such a referendum. For me, the killer observation here is just the sheer lack of the UK actually publicly stating that it wants to leave the EU. Invoking Article 50 is merely what starts the negotiations. And the only reason for not starting the negotiations, given that the longer the instability caused by the Brexit goes on, the more harm it will do to your country, is that you want someone to talk you out of it. And most juicily of all, there really don't seem to be any prominent Brexiters that are calling for the invoking of Article 50. It's almost like now that the moment of truth is here, they've got no will to push that button either. It's just like that crazy girlfriend who is always threatening to leave until you actually say, okay, fine, leave. So I've decided to help you out here. I've started a petition for you stating that the government should immediately invoke Article 50. Specifically, the Brexit referendum showed that it is the people's will to leave the EU. The UK government should respect this result and immediately invoke Article 50 so the negotiations about the Brexit can begin. Delaying this decision will simply cause uncertainty that will damage the UK. If you get more than 10,000 signatures, the government will respond to your petition. More than 100,000 and it will be considered for debate in Parliament. Let's see if your heart's really in this.